Aunt Mildred, momentarily startled, regained her composure with chilling speed. "Nonsense, dear brother," she said, her voice smooth as silk, yet laced with steel. "They're just friends of Mark's. They were just leaving." She shot Mark and Emily a warning glance, a silent command to play along. Mark, though terrified, understood the precariousness of their situation. He knew his father's volatile nature, the unpredictable violence that simmered beneath the surface. He forced a weak smile, a grotesque imitation of normalcy. "Yes, father," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "We were just on our way out." But the man at the top of the stairs wasn't fooled. His wild eyes darted between them, suspicion and paranoia etched on his face. "Friends?" he repeated, his voice a low growl. "They don't look like friends." He took a step down the stairs, his gaze fixed on Emily, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "I know her," he rasped, his voice dripping with malice. "She's the one." Emily shrunk back against Mark, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy with unspoken menace, and the memory of his touch sent a shudder through her. Aunt Mildred, sensing the escalating danger, stepped forward, placing herself between the escaped convict and Emily. Now, dear brother," she said, her voice soothing, almost hypnotic. "You're mistaken. It's been a long time. Your mind is playing tricks on you." The man hesitated, his gaze still fixed on Emily, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. But the underlying madness remained, a volatile current just below the surface. He took another step down, reaching out a trembling hand. "But I remember," he mumbled, his voice thick with a terrifying familiarity. Just as his hand reached towards Emily, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the house, a sound filled with raw terror and agony. It wasn't Emily's scream. It came from somewhere deeper within the house, from the locked basement below. And it was followed by another sound, a sickening thud that silenced everyone in the room. The chilling silence that followed was broken only by the heavy breathing of the escaped killer, his eyes now wide with a new, primal fear. He looked at Aunt Mildred, his voice a terrified whisper. What was that? The scream from the basement, followed by the sickening thud, hung in the air like a shroud, smothering the already tense atmosphere. Aunt Mildred's carefully constructed facade cracked, a flicker of genuine fear crossing her face before being swiftly replaced by a mask of cold determination. "Nothing, dear brother," she said, her voice strained, too high-pitched. "Just the house settling." But the lie was transparent. The escaped killer, his paranoia heightened by the unsettling sound, wasn't convinced. He stared at the basement door, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. "There's something down there," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Something bad." Mark and Emily exchanged a terrified glance. Something bad. The chillingly vague phrase resonated with the unsettling events of the past few days. The whispers, the groans, the growing sense of a malevolent presence within the house. What other horrors lurked in Aunt Mildred's meticulously curated collection of oddities? "Don't be ridiculous," Aunt Mildred snapped, her voice sharper now, the veneer of composure beginning to fray. "There's nothing down there but old boxes and forgotten trinkets." But as she spoke, a low, rhythmic thumping began to emanate from the basement, a steady, pulsating beat that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. Thump, thump, thump. The sound grew louder, more insistent, like a monstrous heartbeat counting down to something terrible. The escaped killer, his fear now bordering on panic, backed away from the basement door, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "We need to leave," he hissed, his voice laced with urgency. "Now." Aunt Mildred, however, stood her ground, her face a mask of grim determination. "We can't leave," she said, her voice low and steady. "Not yet. We have to finish what we started." She reached for the basement key, her hand trembling slightly. As her fingers brushed the cold metal, the thumping from the basement intensified, reaching a deafening crescendo. And then, with a sickening crack, the basement door swung inward, revealing a gaping darkness within. A gust of icy air swept through the house, carrying with it the stench of decay and something else, something ancient and foul. And from the darkness, a voice, raspy and weak, yet filled with an unimaginable malice, whispered a single word: Mildred. The chilling whisper of Aunt Mildred's name from the darkness shattered the tense tableau. The escaped killer, paralyzed by terror, could only stare at the open basement door, his eyes wide with primal fear. Aunt Mildred, however, seemed to snap out of her trance-like state. A look of grim understanding, almost resignation, settled on her face. "He's awake," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. And then, everything became horrifyingly clear. The whispers, the groaning, the searching. It wasn't a ghost, but the escaped killer, driven by a desperate hunt for something hidden within the house. The missing hand from the antique doll, the ransacked rooms. He had been searching for something small, something valuable, something Aunt Mildred had promised him. A hidden family heirloom, a diamond necklace worth millions, sewn into the doll's stuffing generations ago. He'd found it, just before. The thumping sound resumed, slower now, deliberate. A figure emerged from the darkness, its form barely discernible in the dim light. It was a man, emaciated and weak, but with a terrifying intensity in his eyes. He wasn't alone. Behind him, bound and gagged, was another figure, its clothes torn and bloodied. It was the source of the scream, the sickening thud. Another friend of Aunt Mildred's, someone she had deemed expendable, someone who knew too much. Mark finally understood. It wasn't his father who had committed the horrific murders years ago. It was Aunt Mildred. She had framed her brother, promised him freedom, used him as a pawn in her twisted game. And the groaning, searching sounds weren't just his father looking for the heirloom. They were both of them, searching for more victims to silence. Aunt Mildred turned to Mark and Emily, a chillingly calm expression on her face. "I'm sorry it had to end this way," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "But family secrets must be kept." The two figures from the basement advanced, their shadows stretching across the room like grasping claws. Mark and Emily, trapped between the deranged brother and the calculating sister, knew their fate was sealed. There would be no escape from this house of horrors. The screams that echoed through the old Victorian mansion that night were swallowed by the storm, lost to the wind and the rain. Another secret buried within the decaying walls of Aunt Mildred's house. The house and its secrets remained.